a lot of state departments, agencies that took a hit, but I can tell you that probably no more any more than parks. And as the commissioner had said earlier, and the director has said, you know, there was a charge of being self-sustaining, and I want to congratulate you, Director, for what you've done, because you're certainly your numbers prove that you've taken that charge and are running with it, and I want to thank you. So, any questions or comments from the committee? Thank you, Director, for what you do, sir. And we look forward to any of these issues, you being here to help us sort through them. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Becky. Great presentation. At this time, Mr. Chairman and committee, I'll ask Colonel Henderson to come up and give a report from our Law Enforcement Division.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak to you about our division. You know, it's always great to have that opportunity. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of history about game wardens in the state of Georgia. You know, we're called conservation rangers today, but initially they were created by the General Assembly as game wardens, and that was in 1911, which that means we're the oldest state law enforcement agency in this state. So we're kind of proud of the fact that the General Assembly saw fit back in 1911 that the first state officers they felt like they needed were game wardens. And of course, those were county appointments as a game warden. The mission, our mission is to conserve our natural resources and protect the people we serve. Basically with that, you know, to me, that's what we call conservation law enforcement. We focus, of course, we do enforce the law, but we want our officers to be an integral part of their community. You know, we want to try to leave everybody with something positive if that's at all possible. You know, and sometimes when you're a law enforcement officer, that's not always easy to do, but that's our goal. You know, as to, trying to hammer somebody with the enforcement of a law, we just want to correct it. We want voluntary compliance in the future, and whatever it takes to achieve that is what we're striving to do. We know that we're enforcing recreational time activities. So we have to have a lot different approach when we're dealing with the public with that, and we realize that. So our officers have quite a balance that they work on to achieve that, but still on top of their game as an enforcement officer. So it's a very unique position that they're put in. Our officers, as I mentioned, are called conservation rangers now, you know, and that's not a 9-to-5 job. That's 24 hours a day whenever that call comes in to be able to respond. Our officers work 3 weekends out of every month, and of course all the main holidays when everybody else is off recreating, that's when they have to be out working. It's just part of the job, part of what comes along with it. You know, Georgia is very blessed with the hunting and fishing opportunities that are here. And, you know, with that being our core mission, we enforce that. 1.4 million anglers in Georgia, 630,000 hunters, and there's 332,000 registered boats in this state. And all that's the main thing that we focus on when it comes to enforcement, to ensure compliance with those activities, but more importantly, that those individuals go home at the end of the day. You know, if they're out recreating on a boat, out hunting, we want them to be safe, and we want them to return back home to their family. So there's a public safety nexus to a lot of what we do. Mention what our core mission is, and again, that's the hunting, the fishing, the boating, some environmental. Most of that's mostly litter related. You know, Environmental Protection Division does more of the commercial stuff, but we touch that a little bit. Commercial related fishing there on Georgia's coast, the shellfish industry, and other state and federal laws. We also conduct the mandated hunter education and the boater education courses. You know, we've made a lot of progress with the department over the past few years, moving more toward other opportunities for online when it comes to hunter education, boater education, but we still assist with those programs as much as practical. In addition to that, I look at it from the standpoint that one of our other missions is that we support every division of this department. If there's an issue that they have that needs an enforcement touch to it, maybe there's an issue with shoal bass on the Flint River or something, somebody catching too many or other things that helps them with their function, we're also an integral part to support them with their needs. Because of our unique skill sets and unique equipment that our officers have, we get asked to help with a lot of other activities that are out there when it relates to water or woods. We do a lot of patrols on private properties, our DNR controlled properties, and of course all the waterways within the state. So that's a significant amount that our folks deal with. And because they have those unique response capabilities, through executive orders from the governors over the years, we've been mandated to be a part of the state's counterterrorism task force, the Georgia Body Recovery Team, the Child Abduction Response Team, and then, of course, Georgia's Marijuana Eradication Program. And most everything that we do with those are water and woods nexus to it. Again, that goes back to what the skill set are of our officers. And that's part of the teamwork that we're associated with the state of Georgia. That's way less than 10% of what we do. We stay engaged with that. Our folks are already trained for the water and woods related environment, so there's nothing really different they're doing other than it's a little bit different mission. We try to keep our folks focused on the hunting and fishing aspects of what we do. But just as information purposes, we do have other things that we're asked to do. The DNR controlled properties. Director Kelly mentioned the state parks and historic sites. We've got 102 wildlife management areas and 10 public fishing areas that we provide the law enforcement patrols on. So we're the public safety piece associated with those DNR controlled properties. That's 37 million acres of public and private land in this state that we're responsible for patrolling. When it comes to the waterways, Georgia's blessed with a lot of water in this state. 16,000 miles of river, 500,000 acres of impounded waters, 100 miles of a linear shoreline here on the coast, and our officers can go out to 200 miles offshore. So that's a lot of territory that they're responsible and tasked with covering. Public education. To me, this is very important for our folks to be involved with. That's engaging the public with what we do, keeping them informed with what we do, having that nexus to the younger generation, helping to develop those future hunters, trying to keep individuals interested in our sport that we provide here in this state. Our officers are expected to be a part of their community. It's always really good when I hear from a legislator or a sheriff or someone when they say, my game warden in my county. You know, that's ownership that you have for them. And we expect them to be a part of that, to be out there, so that you know who those individuals are. Currently, we've got 182 conservation rangers in the state. We've got 212 allocated positions. We've got a few vacancies that we'll be trying to fill this coming year. Another kind of note, just to tell you a little bit about the quality of our officers. This past year, we had 2 officers named actually the same night for 2 national awards. Corporal Greg Wade was named as the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Conservation Law Enforcement Officer of the Year, and Corporal Jason Robertson, who works on Lake Lanier, was the Boating Officer of the Year named by the National Association of Boating Law Administrators. To me, that speaks really, really well of the quality of our officers. First time, in my knowledge, that any state has won that award, both awards, in the same year. Any questions that you might have?
To my good friend from the coast, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good having you as chairman. You started off good. You caused no problems. We've decided to keep you.
Thank you.
Colonel, first let me say that thank you for what you do. And through personal experience, I know that your force does an excellent job. Biggest problem in my area, and I've found it to be that 9 out of 10 complaints are just complaints because some folk don't want any regulation. They feel as though the woods and the waters are open,
Sure.
and short of God himself, no rules.
That's right.
So you have to do what you have to do. My question is, with what's on the board now, the possibility of growing legal marijuana in Georgia. I know you've never run across any of those bushes out there on the coast. We just don't do things like that. But when it becomes legal and we finally learn how to grow it, what do you see from your perspective as a law enforcement? What are the deterrents? And tell me what you're looking at.
Well, sir, you know that's a loaded question, first of all. But what you look at is when lines start getting a little blurred, maybe between what's legal, what's not, from an enforcement standpoint. You know, I'm sure the General Assembly will have the foresight and knowledge to figure out where that line is and make it very clear for us. But that'll be some of the things that'll probably be in contention when it gets to that point. Where's the line, what's legal and what's not with it? You know, at one point in time, marijuana was considered to be #1 cash crop in the state of Georgia.
Yes,
That's
sir.
years ago.
Had some friends who did well.
And so you know a little bit from what they have told you, I'm sure.
Yes, sir. Just a little bit. But Colonel, based on your answer, I'm sure next session you'll be wearing a star instead of an eagle.
Yeah.
You'll find a way.
Representative Tarvin.
Follow-up question on the #1 cash crop. Was it, from a clarification standpoint, was it the #1 cash crop for hemp, for clothing, ropes, paper, or truly was considered #1 cash crop illegally?
It was truly, I mean, this is probably late 80s, truly considered to be Georgia's #1 cash crop for illegal growth.
If that bill does pass the House, just for clarification, if there were 2 to 6 growers and it was restricted to a environment for those growers to be licensed, you probably wouldn't find any out in the woods.
Not
and
licensed, no,
Okay.
sir. I'm sure that will be in a controlled environment.
There probably
you, sir.
would still be some in the woods now.
Not legally.
Not legally.
Not legally.
Oh, my word. Representative LaRicchia.
You mentioned about some vacancies in law enforcement, and I think we've talked. One of those is in my home county. And I think what's interesting for people to know is you mentioned about how you work closely with other law enforcement agencies, whether it's Georgia State Patrol, Sheriff's Department, local law enforcement, and being engaged in their community and how valuable that is. So we're not just missing the law enforcement element of our game and fish. We're missing a person in our community that could be of value. But I was doing some talking with some of them about how we monitor or respond to complaints about well drillers. And I was not aware that game wardens respond to that too. And I think there's a lot of things that you guys do that the public's not aware of that just adds so much value, and just kind of say thank you to for what y'all do.
Thank you.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for what you do and the service that you provide to the state. I have one question. In light of the fact that our water table has gone up, do you see a reasonable spike in the use of the boating venues with respect to economics? Do you see a spike of that coming now since the water table is up?
Yes, sir. There's 2 things that are going to promote that this summer. If gas prices stay where they're at, because marina gas is really expensive, and getting a boat to and from the lake, in addition to the water being there, I think we will see a lot more recreational use of vessels on our waterways this coming summer. You know, if the weather participates and everything else, yes, there will be an increase.
Thank you.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dickerson, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, with these 182 vacancies, do you see a possibility of filling those with the state having extra revenue? And I see that you're in Social Circle and I'm in Conyers, so I'm just wondering if you have anything going on out there.
Well, I know with the license revenues increases that we see that are coming with the bill that will be introduced to increase license fees, there is the potential from that to get some additional conservation officers. The number 182 is actually how many we have filled. So we've got 30 vacancies right now with that, yes, ma'am. And we do anticipate, and we really hope that we're going to get the money to be able to fill those, yes, ma'am.
Colonel, I want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you. You know, the professionalism that is in LE, our law enforcement division, is it certainly we've all recognized it, and especially over the last couple of years. It's amazing. You're two examples of our officers that are recognized nationally. And, you know, the questions, sitting here asking the questions, you know, the responsibility of LE is vast. Again, primarily, you know, I guess they were born out of the hunting and fishing world, but their responsibilities go beyond hunting and fishing. And quite frankly, I think, you know, the question that was asked regarding the cash crop, you know, the ramifications of what we do. And when we make a decision on one side, you know, how is it going to affect us on the other side?
Sure.
You know, is it going to place more demands somewhere else? And guys, I'll remind you, we're focused on you know, the hunting, fishing, the game fishing parks here. So, you know, as we certainly are, we want to make sure we're promoting what we're doing, and the educational resource, but, you know, the public safety. But I want to congratulate you. I know of no other law enforcement division where officers regularly are going to be walking up to people with guns. I mean, you do what now? Yeah. But no, you think about it, but it is. But you know, that is a touchy situation. Even though I know, you know, most of the hunters and fishermen out there, like you said, that's the tradition and
Sure.
the recreation in Georgia. But it's still a sticky spot for your officers to be in. And again, the professionalism that this department displays, I want to say thank you. It is recognized, and thank you for what you're doing. So with that, any other questions?
I'd like to just, I apologize first. I've got to be at the World Congress Center to introduce a young man that won gold medal in the Special Olympics in my county. But I do thank you very much for what y'all do. I do mean that. Welcome, Chairman. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Head us up again. I ran for office because I met so many of you guys. Upon meeting you, pretty much you carry honor when you walk in the woods. You do a job because you're a hunter, fisherman like we are. And I appreciate the opportunity to just anytime. The minute we can meet you, get to know you better, and I know we can count on you when we need you. So I apologize for
That's
listening.
right.
I got to hustle across town.
Commissioner, can we take a break for a second here, Bill? That may be, I know, I think our other directors have come in, but Representative Buckner is here, and I don't think this is going to take too long. But Representative Buckner, if you will, if we'll all remember from last year, House Bill 483, Representative Buckner carried that, and actually it came before this committee, and it was voted favorably, reported out of this committee last March on the 11th. Unfortunately, it was caught up, and so it has come back to committee for further action. So, Representative Buckner, if you'll tell us about your bill.
Okay. I don't usually do this, but I wanted to highlight that the other sponsors of the bill are Representative Gerald Green, Representative Winfred Dukes, Representative Johnny Caldwell, and Representative Jay Powell. And the reason I mention their names is that we all share the same thing in that we all are connected to the Flint River, live either on it or very close to it, and the shoal bass is very commonly found in the Flint. I'm here because they're probably out fishing for the shoal bass. But in any event, the bill did pass this committee. It went to the Rules Committee, and it ran out of time for us to get through the whole process last year. The idea behind recognizing this fish as a sports riverine fish is because it's native to Georgia. There are a few that are being found in Alabama, but it really is native to our state. It is a great sports fish. People enjoy it. This bill does not do anything to say that we want to limit the number of fish that are caught. We don't want to prevent people from enjoying that, but by giving it this special designation, we have found with other designations that have been given to other type wildlife that it creates interest, and it would encourage people to come and enjoy this sports fish, and hopefully would encourage even more economic activity as they come and eat and sleep and visit and spend some money, hopefully, in our state. It's an important fish not only to our natural resources in our state, but to our economy and our tourism. So I would ask for your favorable consideration, and if you have any biological questions, I have David Worley here from the Wildlife Federation that can answer those, but I would be glad to answer any questions that you might have, and I would appreciate your favorable consideration.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
Of course, I will support the bill as we did last time. I want to back up and make sure that is this still a suggested catch and release fish? It was at one time, and there was a problem with hybridization. Is that a correct word? With spotted bass, and it was suggested. I thought it was a suggested catch and release bass. It's not endangered or anything.
It's what has happened is that in some places along the Flint, it was very well populated, and then they noticed that the population had changed and it become scarce. They've done some programs where they've gone and actually been able to restock areas of the Flint or to move some of the fish around so that they it's actually doing. It's thriving very well right now, pretty much in all parts of the state. And
for all these years, I thought this was a black bass type fish, but it's a new species. It's identified as a different species.
I think it's a separate species. I don't think it's new. I mean, obviously it's a. And I don't know if Commissioner. Yeah. And I want to make sure we're clear, Commissioner and Representative. This is by no means putting any mandate or anything on it. It's simply a recognition. I was telling Representative Buckner, I live in Spalding County, and of course it touches Spalding also. Right. And I have not met the gentleman, but he's a sort of a local guide. But believe it or not, there are people who fly in internationally to come fly fish for the shoal bass on the Flint River, and he sort of picked up a little following. And for the avid fly fishermen, this is a international, if you will, destination. So I think that's in light of where the bill is going, is to just give it some recognition as a great sport fish, and certainly the uniqueness of the Flint River, but it's also on the Old Muggy River. So.
Thank you.
I think what you're doing is good, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody from the audience that would like to comment, say a few words on the bill?
I'm Mike Worley with the Georgia Wildlife Federation. We're completely in support of this piece of legislation. It's a great recognition of an emerging sport fishery that, as we were discussing earlier, Georgia's sort of the center of the universe for shoal bass, and this is a great recognition for a very worthwhile sport.
Thank you. We appreciate it. With that, do I hear entertain any motions from the committee?
I'll make a motion with do pass.
I have a motion and a second to do pass. Is there any other further discussion? Hearing none, what's the will of the committee? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. And the bill does pass. Congratulations, Representative Buckner.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
All
now
right.
we can all go fishing.
There you go. I wish we were fishing today. Commissioner, with that, I know we've got our other directors that have come in to join us, if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I meant to say this early on. You've heard two of my Two of the DNR's directors talk about the importance of youth. Hunters and fishermen in this state spend $5 million a day. And it's important that we keep that generation going. It's a very big economic impact. And with that, I wanted to publicly thank one of your members, if you'd allow me, Representative Roger Bruce. A lot of you may not know, he hosts a couple of thousand kids fishing in Sweetwater State Park every year, and he spends a lot of time working on that, and we appreciate it and encourage others to do that in your district because he has a great turnout. So thank you for doing that. We appreciate that. What now?
He's from Harlem and does that.
Well, he's pretty experienced fisherman now. He can get a catfish off the hook anyway. That's right. No noodling, no sir.
Hey, Representative Bruce, I'm with you there.
A great segue in your folder is in the back is this book. It was funded by our Georgia Natural Resources Foundation. The next person I'm going to introduce is Dr. Dave Crass. He runs our Historic Preservation Division, and he came up with this idea. He sought out the funding with the foundation. They funded it, and this is his work product. It's very interesting. There's a ton of stuff in those folders, I know, but if you decide just to read only one thing, read this. Dave came to me one day and said, Mark, all 6 DNR commissioners are still living. We need to start chronicling some of this as we all get older. And I'm not the youngest one, believe me, but Dave went to work on this. It took about a year, and it's just a great book, and it talks about our department from beginning to end and gives a lot of current information as well. So with that, I'll call on Dr. Crass.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman. The Historic Preservation Division consists of 26 folks on the staff, and our budget is about $3.2 million, almost evenly divided between federal and state monies. We actually started as the old Georgia Historical Commission way back in 1952. In 1966, Congress passed a federal act called the National Historic Preservation Act that I'll talk about here briefly in a moment or two, and that significantly increased the scope of our office's responsibility. I'd like to talk about 6 programs that altogether cover about 90% of what our division does on a day-to-day basis. And the first of those is something called the National Register of Historic Places. Most of you have probably heard about this. It actually is a list of the most important historic places in a state that are worthy of preservation. And it's a pretty arduous task to get listed on the register. There's a lot of research involved and a lot of writing involved. And then that nomination has to be vetted by our office and an external advisory board here at the state level. And then finally it goes to the National Park Service to be vetted by NPS. Almost everything that we do hinges on either eligibility for listing on the National Register or actual listing on the National Register, and that's why I mention it first. The other thing I'd like to say before I leave that topic is that there's a misconception out there that listing on the National Register in some way limits what a property owner can do with their property, and that is absolutely not the case. It is simply a stamp of approval by our office and the National Park Service. The second program area I'd like to mention is our environmental review program. Back in the 1950s and early 1960s, federal agencies were coming into the states and carrying out big projects with no input from states' citizens. So think about those horrible low-income housing towers that got thrown up in the 60s, or the federal highway, interstate highway system, those sorts of things. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors got together in the early 1960s and went to Congress and lobbied so that the state's citizens would have a voice at the table with those federal agencies when these projects came up. And the result of that was something called the National Historic Preservation Act. And what that act does is it requires federal agencies doing work in Georgia to consult with our office as to the effects of their actions on historic resources, be they archaeological sites, historic buildings, or historic landscapes. We review about 2,000 to 3,000 of these projects a year. They range in size from cell tower sightings all the way up to the Savannah Harbor deepening. That's a project I've been involved with now for about 16 of the 17 years I've been at the agency. Obviously, these projects are very deeply involved with economic development in the state. There's always money involved with these projects, and so I'm very proud of the fact that the folks in our division are very rigorous in their reviews, but they also are very, very efficient. I would stack our turnaround time up against any other state historic preservation office in the country. The third program area I'd like to mention is our tax incentive program. There are a lot of old, derelict, but historically significant buildings around the state that could be put back into productive use instead of ending up in a landfill somewhere. And so there are actually 3 tracks to the tax incentive program that we administer. There is a federal track where the feds give a developer a 20% credit on their income taxes for rehabilitating an old building and putting it back into productive use. And then we have 2 state programs. One gives a developer a 25% income tax credit. The other gives the property owner a real estate tax abatement so that their taxes stay at the pre-rehabilitation rate for a number of years, and then they gradually escalate to the going rate. This has been a tremendous economic development tool in Georgia. In state fiscal year 15, which was our last annual report, $14 million in available tax credits generated $230 million in private investment. One of the biggest tax credit projects in the country in the last several years is right here in Atlanta. Ponce City Market was about a $230 million project. I'm very proud of our office's involvement in that project, and it has really ignited the reinvigoration of the old Fourth Ward. The fourth area I'd like to talk about is our archaeology program. We have a very small but extremely talented group of archaeologists on our staff. We work primarily on DNR properties with universities. And essentially our intent is to make sure that our agency complies and is a good steward of the archaeological sites that we hold in trust for the public. Probably one of our most important discoveries in the last 5 or 6 years was a Confederate POW camp down at Magnolia Springs State Park, one of the few intact such sites in the country. The fifth area I'd like to talk about is the Georgia African American Historic Preservation Network. This is a tiny little program, basically 1 employee, an intern, and some operating money. But it's been a tremendous boon for underserved communities around the state, helping them to bootstrap projects. And I'll give you a good example. Down on St. Simon's is a little proverbial one-room schoolhouse, Harrington School, that operated from about the turn of the last century to the 1970s when it was shuttered. And local folks came to us about a decade ago and asked if we would help them to figure out a way to rehabilitate that property and put it back into use in the community. And so with an awful lot of local leadership, that project is now coming to completion. I'm proud to say that the county acquired the property for passive use green space, and the building itself is just about complete, and we'll open those doors here in the next few months as a community activity center. So that's the type of thing that that program does. And then the last thing that I'll mention, last program area I'll mention is something called our Certified Local Government Program. This is a joint program that's administered by the National Park Service, our office, and local jurisdictions. And in order to become a CLG, a jurisdiction has to pass a historic preservation ordinance, has to impanel a commission to administer that ordinance, and has to designate at least 1 local historic district. Now, becoming a CLG carries a couple of benefits. One is they get access to increased technical support from our office. Another is that they get access to some small federal pass-through grants that we administer. But the most important benefit is it's another planning tool for local citizens to control development of their historic downtowns. And good examples of CLGs are places like Madison, Monticello, Thomasville, Macon's a CLG. So to wrap up, typically local communities will use a package of these programs that I've described to you to reinvigorate their historic downtowns. And with that, I'll hush up and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
Crash.
much.
You do a lot that's behind the scenes, and I appreciate it because obviously your department touches a lot of things that probably we didn't know you were touching, and but we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Commissioner.
Dr. Crass. At this time, I'll call Spud Woodward up. He has the prettiest office in our department. His office is down right on the marsh in Glenn County, right before you cross the bridge to go to Jekyll, that beautiful building on the left, and he has a great view every day, but does a great job for us on the coast. But
Commissioner, you think we could hold some meetings down there with the director?
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, everybody. Good to see y'all again. I am Spud Woodward, Director of Coastal Resources Division, and yes, we do have a coast, and it is a very important coast ecologically and economically. You know, 2 deep water ports are generating billions of dollars into the economy, and we have about a $2 billion tourist economy and about $500,000 of economic activity generated by fishing, both commercial fishing to produce seafood. That's about 40 to 50 million, and then the balance of that's produced by saltwater fishermen who are spending large sums of money buying big boats and lots of gas to go in the ocean and have a good time. So, but it is a very important area of the coast. 14 major barrier islands, about 500,000 acres of coastal marshlands and tidal water bottoms. Very important part of the state. Coastal Resource Division's mission is to balance coastal development and protection of the coast's natural assets, social cultural heritage, and recreational resources for the benefit of present and future generations. And I really want to emphasize that word balance, because that's the world we live in. We got to balance, you know, the presence of humans and our impacts on making sure those resources continue to exist for future generations. We do this through 4 major focus areas. One is the Georgia Coastal Management Program. Through a partnership with the federal government, we receive about $2 million a year in federal funds appropriated by Congress. About $1 million of this goes straight through us to local communities for projects that cover the gamut from stormwater management planning to green space planning to nature trails, you name it. A lot of it goes to research to make sure that we have a good foundation of science-based information to manage our coastal resources. We also provide a lot of technical assistance to our local communities so they can plan for coastal hazards like hurricane, like the flooding that we saw happening up in New Jersey and Delaware this weekend. Also, protection of our coastal marshlands and our barrier island beaches and sand sharing system. Georgia was very progressive. Back in the 70s, this body passed some laws to protect our marshlands and our barrier island beaches that were unprecedented, and they've really been a model for a lot of other states to look at and see how forward thinking can really ensure that you have these resources available for the future. We do that through the Coastal Marshland Protection Act and the Shore Protection Act. Saltwater fishery management, we do this in a complementary fashion with the folks at WRD. We have a lot of fish that migrate through saltwater into freshwater, like shad and sturgeon, striped bass, things like that. So we work very closely with Wildlife Resource Division. We also work closely with them on access and enhancement. We have about 40 non-boating fishing access sites in coastal Georgia that we help maintain, and about 42 boating access sites. And one of the things I'll point out is that you go to a boat ramp on an inland reservoir, and they're pretty easy to maintain. You go down to the coast where the water rises and falls 6 to 9 feet twice a day, and it's a whole different proposition. You can build a lot of freshwater boat ramps for the cost of one saltwater boat ramp. So it's an ongoing task to make sure we keep that access available. We also try to enhance habitat in the ocean. Georgia has jurisdiction out to 3 miles in the Atlantic Ocean, so we have roughly 300 square miles of Atlantic Ocean under our legal jurisdiction. But beyond that, it's the federal government's jurisdiction. So we work very closely with the federal government to make sure that management is consistent with the interest of the state of Georgia, to make sure that we develop habitat out there that's attractive to fish and to fishermen. Because we want to certainly keep that economic engine that's fishing going. We also are trying to recruit new generations of fishermen. We provide a lot of youth fishing activities and opportunities. And that fits in the realm of public outreach. A big part of what we try to do is make sure that people appreciate the coast we have, understand why that coast is so important and what their role is even far inland in taking care of that. Because I like to tell folks that the old Turner Field, that the water that comes out of a sprinkler in Turner Field ends up in the Altamaha River and ends up in the Atlantic Ocean through Georgia. So we all have a connection to that coast, even though we may be hundreds of miles away. And so it's a big part of our mission to make sure that folks know that what happens inland has a dramatic and direct effect on coastal Georgia. We do our work with a workforce of about 58 full-time positions and an annual budget of about $7 million, of which about $2 million is state money generated by license revenues and general revenues. The balance of the funding is from two predominantly federal sources. One is the Coastal Zone Management, which is appropriated funds from Congress. The other is federal aid and sport fish restoration, which are trust funds provided back to the state on an earned basis. So that's a real quick overview. You do have a fact sheet in there. I also want to call your attention to something else that's in your packet, and that is the first ever Coastal Georgia Ecosystem Report Card. We took this on as a task through our coastal management program because we collect terabytes of data on everything from salinity to temperature to shrimp abundance and everything else, but that data by itself doesn't mean a whole lot to people without any context. And one of the main purposes of this report card was to take some of that data and put it in context by comparing that data to thresholds or standards of what's good, what's bad, what's excellent, and give the public a source of information like your report card from school that they can look at and make some sense out of, and know that the work that the department's doing is providing useful information so we can make good management decisions for now and the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Representative Williams, you wouldn't have to have anything to say about the coast, would you?
Nothing but something good, Mr. Chairman. Spud, always good to see you.
Good to
Thank
see
you
you
for
too.
what you do. This committee has several people that have come on it in recent years. When Chairman Bob Lane was chairman, maybe 12 years ago. Would you mind, for the benefit of those that didn't have the privilege to be there, telling them the size of that stingray I pulled off the coast in Sapelo? They need to hear. No, she just got carried away at the work. When you're from the city, it's hard to tell.
Right. Well, the standard answer that I've given, and it might be lost on some of the younger members of your committee, is the hood of a 1957 Chevrolet.
Thank you, Spud. And hers was a small Volkswagen.
And that I will not touch.
You know, I hear some fish tails. I'm sorry. You know, here, but no, thank you, Director. I know that I've had the opportunity to visit a lot personally on the coast, and we truly have a very unique, you know, ecosystem on the coast of Georgia. It is unlike anywhere else. And I've been fortunate enough to learn a little bit more about the science and the habitat down there. Certainly our pursuit of fishing, you know, as a sport, but guys, it's much more to that. Our economy, you know, the commercial aspect of you know, the fishing or the, you know, crabbing, shrimping, all that off the coast plays a very vital role in our state. And certainly probably some of us are going to go out to dinner tonight or could go out to dinner and partake of the great things that come off the coast. So it's very diverse, and I would encourage you to, we very well, Commissioner and Director, you know, want to do some more things down there is we make sure that the rest of Georgia understands the golden isles, as they call it, our true treasure on the coast. So we appreciate it very, very much.
Well, you're welcome, and as you know, we always are ready to show it off.
Yep. So,
all right,
thank you, Director.
Thank you for being a good steward of the resource.
Yes.
Thank you, Spud. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Dan Forrester, our great Wildlife Resources Director, had a previously scheduled out-of-town conference he was presenting at, but the mark of any great leader is that one that can hire great people. And he has an outstanding Deputy Director of Wildlife Resources, Mr. Mark Whitney. And Mark, if you'll come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll try to stand up to that compliment. I don't know how well I'll do. I'll let y'all be the judges, but it is my pleasure to serve as the Assistant Director of Wildlife Resources, and Dan does send his regrets for not being able to be here. Just a little bit about wildlife resources so you understand our structure. We're divided up into 3 different sections. Easy to understand what those sections are when you hear the name. We have a fisheries management section. They take care of the fish in the freshwater systems that Spud referred to just a little while ago. We have a game management section. The game management section is responsible for everything that's hunted and trapped, and also responsible for managing the great wildlife management area system that we have in this state that people can go out and recreate on. And then we have our non-game conservation section. And our non-game conservation section takes care of everything else, about 95% of the species out there, and certainly are in charge of trying to figure out how to manage for and how many of that we have for certain species that fall under rare, threatened, and endangered. Now, our mission is to conserve, enhance, and promote our fish and wildlife resources and our outdoor heritage, because hunting and fishing have declined in terms of percentage participation over the decades, and that's an important part of who Georgia is. It also is an important part of how we manage the wildlife resource here in the state, because hunters and anglers are responsible for the majority of the funding that comes back to us in order to be able to do that. As you're already aware, wildlife is defined by law as a public trust resource. That means it belongs to the citizens of the state of Georgia. It's held by the state to ensure wise use, and conservation for the public good, essentially for the good of everybody who wants to enjoy it, or the good of everybody who interacts with it in one way or another. Now, our particular charge is bringing science to that equation. We hire a lot of scientists, wildlife scientists, people who spend quite a number of years in college to get just the basic backgrounds on how you manage populations at a statewide level. And we do that, in order to ensure sustainability of the fish and wildlife resource and the maintenance of healthy ecosystems in the state, because all of that adds to our quality of life and certainly a healthy economy in Georgia. And we do that several ways. First off, we set regulations for the take of fish and wildlife. Both our fisheries and our game management sections do that. We also manage the plant communities, especially on state lands that those wildlife depend on. We provide what we call technical assistance, advice, help to private citizens, municipal governments, corporate entities across the state who deal with wildlife in one way or another or have an interest in it. And of course, we do research to gather those reams of data that Spud talked about. And that's the basis of the science that we bring to bear. Now, so there's several challenges associated with it, and many of them that y'all run into in terms of trying to determine how to make public policy decisions. But in managing the resource for the public trust, I'm just going to name a few that I know many of y'all have encountered, and I'm sure you will encounter again, probably in the near future. Privatization of wildlife. As we talked about, it's a public trust resource. It's owned by the citizens. But as people are very attracted to wildlife and quite often want to own it for one reason or another. Some of those reasons are as pets, others are as breeding stock, and some are for even confined hunting operations. All topics that this committee at one time or another has encountered and probably will again in the future. Importation and or ownership of either wildlife or what we define as wild animals, those that aren't indigenous to the state, but may have some kind of inherent problem with them that could impact either the health of our wildlife resources or, for that matter, public human health. And some of y'all have encountered that through some of the debates that have gone on for species, for instance, like hedgehogs. One of the other issues that we run into is trying to collect enough data to provide the information for y'all to make good public policy decisions. And in particular, enough data on species that may fall into a category of where there's not much known about them. And I know you've heard sometime over the last 4 or 5 years about 122 species in this state that were petitioned by a private entity to be listed as threatened or endangered. When that happens, the species that are public trust resources for the state fall out of the authority of the state and they go under the federal government, and that creates problems. And that's the last thing we want to have happen. And so we're frantically trying to get up to speed on where these species occur, how many of them there actually are, so that we can provide that information to Fish and Wildlife Service and try to combat some of the lack of information and erroneous information that's out there. Now, why is all this important? Why do we manage? Why do we try so hard? I talked about a healthy economy and I talked about quality of life. Well, proper management, sustainable wildlife are important because of the contributions that they make to the economy and our quality. 1.4 million Georgians fish in this state. 1.4 million. 630,000 hunt. Almost 2.5 million like to participate in what we call wildlife watching. I would refer to now our fact sheet that you'll find in your folders. All these numbers are in there, and there are some others in particular when you still want to start talking about economic impacts. But let's talk a little bit about economic impact, at least one gross number. When you add an economic ripple effect to what hunting and fishing means to this state and wildlife watching, the numbers now are up to $5.6 billion a year. And that's why we try so hard. That's why we manage, and that's why we want to maintain a state that has good, healthy populations of fish and wildlife. Now, how do we do it? And I'm just going to leave you with a couple of thoughts and a little bit of information related to our budget, because I want you to understand that we do this in a pretty lean, mean way, and we're a good value to the state. At least I believe so. Our budget expenditures for last year, about 45% of that came from federal dollars. Most of those are associated with an excise tax on hunting and fishing equipment that hunters and anglers contribute to a trust fund that we then get back related to the number of hunting and fishing licenses we sell. But that makes up about 45% of our annual expenditures. The next highest number is about 30%. 30% is what's classified as what we call other funds. Those funds are not state appropriated dollars so much. And what those categories comprise of are things like the wildlife license tags that we sell and fund our non-game section for. We also fund our bobwhite quail initiative with that. We have some of our fisheries management, in particular related to trout, from those 3 license types. We do have fundraisers. We get donations. All those are other funds. And we also get nonprofit donations for things like acquisition of properties or protection of species. Those go into our budget as well. But all of that combined makes up about 30%. So now we're up to 75%. That means 25% of our budget are state dollars. Of that 25%, about 85% of those dollars come from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. So when you add that to our federal dollars, you figure out pretty quickly that conservation of wildlife and fish in this state rides on the back of hunters and anglers, which is great. And they have always stepped up and said they want to do that. So I just leave you with that thought. We are lean and mean. I think we do a pretty good job, and we're proud of what we do. And again, it's my pleasure to serve. And I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions, happy to answer.
Quickly drop off in the number of hunters. We're seeing fewer hunters than we used to see. Is that?
The trend is a decline, a general decline in the numbers of hunters.
Okay.
Yes,
Are we seeing a drop off in number of people taking hunter safety courses, mostly in youth that's dropping off? And let me just ask all the question, and I'll try to be quiet, which is hard for me to do. Are we seeing a drop off in the hunter safety courses? Are we seeing an increase in women hunters? Is there any data on that, which I think is very important to preserving what my hunting heritage is, get some women involved? And have we found a way, are we seeing an increase in the number of bobwhite quail? Or in the wild quail, are we seeing an increase in the population in the state of Georgia?
All great questions. I'll try to touch on them all a little bit, and happy to talk in more detail with you at some other time too on any of these topics. But related to the number of hunters, although the general trend is downward, I can tell you that the number of individual license sales that we have had in the last 2 years has gone up. The number of certified, what we call certified hunters and anglers, also have gone up. Now, some of that has to do with some creative ways of counting certification for us, because certification is how we apply for those federal dollars that are out there and available for us to get. So we want to increase certification. But the actual total number of licensed sales has gone up. The general trend is still downward, but the reason that is, I will tell you, one, there are more women involved there are. We have not seen a drop-off in the number of hunter ed participants. In fact, it's stayed pretty steady, around 15,000 roughly every year. We have stepped up our efforts. There's actually a national effort for what we call recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters in this state. Georgia actually is leading on the leading edge of a lot of that, have implemented a lot of creative ways to attract hunters. In particular, our communications. We have one of the most communications with our customers. We have one of the most visited Facebook pages. We put out a tremendous amount of information. We now have the ability to communicate via email with about 950,000 of our constituents. And we are constantly pushing out information that they indicate to us that they want to see. That constant communication has increased a better dialogue with them, a lot of greater participation and interest, I think, and so we're holding off pretty well right now. And I regret I forgot the last part, bobwhite quail.
Oh.
It's
all about the parties.
And it's surprising I should forget that when I actually started my career as a quail biologist. I still call myself one, and was responsible for writing the plan that created the bobwhite quail initiative here in the state. I'll pat myself on the back one time anyway. Statewide, our quail population has not increased, and the factors are really habitat related. Here's what I can tell you. There's no new information out there about how you manage for quail. Managing for quail's easy in one respect. We know what it takes. It's hard in another, because you have to be doing something constantly, because habitat grows out of good stuff for quail real quickly. And that's what happened to us statewide, and it happened across the entire range of quail in 34 states here, is basic land management practices changed. While they changed, other use practices changed as well. Bigger fields, much cleaner farming, forestry practices that weren't conducive to necessarily quail, but may have been conducive to other types of wildlife. So all those things really kind of played a role. There's been no big turnaround for quail, but if you want to manage for quail, we have technical assistance biologists that are in our bobwhite quail. They can tell you how to do it. They can visit your property. They can say, this is how you do it here, and they'll be right, because it's a science, but it's well known. Yes, sir.
Who's? 16. Is that? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just checked thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just happened to check an email, and I heard you say something about managing for quail. What you talking about? You're not talking about limiting the number of quail that we okay, I just want to make sure.
No, Representative, we need more quail.
Okay.
More quail.
Okay.
Wild quail.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that my people don't go south somewhere and come back talking about they couldn't do nothing. No. You understand?
The last thing in the world we want to have happen.
It is,
yes, ma'am.
It is all about the partridge.
It's all about the partridge.
Committee members, we've gone over a little bit, but I think this is helpful as we start this session, and make sure everyone is been reintroduced to our DNR and all of our agencies up under it and what they do. Mark, on behalf of the committee, again, thank you. Very important. I think, all of what you heard from the folks that are here, we've got a very diverse state, from the mountains to the coast, fisheries, woodlands, the savannas, all of it. And whatever you do, it is about habitat. And if you want to grow more critters or have more fish, I'm sorry, there's a way to do it. And we've got more science available to us than we've ever had. Mark said it right. We've just got to make sure that we go at it and do it. And we've got a lot of quality hunting and fishing in Georgia, and it's a huge economic part of the tourism in Georgia. In fact, I don't know if it was the latest study, if we still are, but at one time I know we were the #1 destination state. I don't know if we were still holding that for hunting and fishing. But very important what we do. But all starts with people wanting to come here because we have the best hunting and fishing, and it really is as simple as that. So again, guys, what we do in this committee is I can't tell you how much it touches people's lives, and it touches them more than just in a public policy way. It touches them in a way in which they grew up, their heritage, their traditions of what they do. And I want us to make sure that anything we do in this committee, it is building on those heritages and the traditions, and make sure that the enjoyment of Georgia's great natural resources continue and they get better and better. So with that, I appreciate our first meeting this session, and I'm sure we've got some more bills to come, and we'll get to business. With that, we're adjourned.